So, there we go. Hi, and welcome everybody. Nice to have you here for this fantastic topic authorization in Azure. And I've been a bit cocky as well, done it right. Yeah, sounds good. So, how has the conference been so far? Glad to hear. Like it. And you skipped lunch for me. Yes, that is nice. So, short introduction of me. My name is Mattias Lögdberg. I'm an Azure MVP since 2017, and today I work a solution architect might be right, but also a founder of a company called DevOps Solutions. We work with reviews and analysis of Azure implementations, specialized on integration space, I would say. That is our core business, and you can follow me on social media if you want to. Probably LinkedIn. That's most active on nowadays. So, Azure PaaS Authorization done right. So, Azure has been around for quite some time, right? I even read somewhere it was his birthday the other day, if I'm not correct. I don't remember the years. You nodded. No, not okay. 2007-ish, something like that. So it's been along for quite some time. And it's easy to forget that this has evolved quite heavily over the years, because we are now today working as it is today, right? So just a quick question. How many of you are working with Azure? A bunch of you. How many of you have done it more than like 5 years? Still quite a bunch. Cool. And how many of you are new, like the 2 last years-ish? A few, yeah. So you guys are more like, this is born into what we are today using, and we others are, getting along with our history, with everything that has. Cool. So just as a starter, I would say security has increased quite a lot heavily the last 2 years, especially in cloud. I mean, when I started in cloud, it was like, go have fun. And now it's like we have more stuff in production there than on-prem, many cases. So it has been evolving heavily, even at companies. And also security has come with us as a shock, I would say, rather. Because in the beginning, we were just, yay, doing whatever we wanted. Using the tools needed to get the job done and how we done it. But today is another story. We need to be more secure, and also security on our companies is a lot more strict as well. So we talked a little bit about background on Azure, but also let's skip the next one. I'm not a fan of slides. So the main thing when Azure started off, every service had to protect themselves more or less. Today we're a bit used with that RBAC is there for us in many cases. But in the beginning, everything was more or less needed to have protect themselves. So every provider needed to implement their own security model or shared it with others, but they need to have their own. They need to protect their own services, which means that there was a lot of static keys going on. You might be aware of the SaaS keys that was used by storage account and service bus. And then many new services started using static keys, actually. And I mean, static keys in itself might not be the biggest problem. Or? Silence. That's good. Static keys in itself is actually a problem. But the problem I would say is not that the key is static, it's actually managing it and contain it over time. That is the real problem. Because managing keys is far more difficult than we think, I would say. I mean, if I'm going to go to myself on a short story of other stuff, so this might be, I hope this is, what do you call it, prescribated, or what do you call it, what's the English word for prescriberat? Sorry? Statute of Liberty. Statute of limitation. Okay, so this is a, yeah, exactly, something like that. Sounds good. Old crimes. So back in the day when I was like on Is it high school? That's gymnasium? Yeah, perfect. So we didn't have these fancy phones we have today, the smartphones back then. So we have smart calculators. So what we did is with those calculators, we started to program them, of course, because we liked it. So we started adding like sheets into these. So formulas that we needed to have on like math classes and stuff like that. And in order to protect that, because teachers could come and look at it, we added a key. And the story about this is like we started to deliver these programs to several people. And in order to protect ourselves, because I mean a key is a key and a static key is a key, we started to rotating keys. So next program actually had a new key, or a new key, a new key. And imagine the people that maybe not always came along with that key, kind of forgot that key. Yeah, that wasn't so fun for them, because then they were out of it and they were counting on it. And for us who did it, it was easy for us to keep track of that key, because we knew what key we had used, we knew what key we were on. But as soon as you start distributing it, it's a really tricky thing. And it's the same thing when we come to cloud. So one of the biggest things I would say let's close that one up. Let's jump into my favorite tool. So the idea of this is that we have a storage account or similar that we need to use. And we have some services using it. And also maybe a developer using it from his laptop. Let's just draw a nice laptop here. So as soon as we have these static keys, it's easy to get started. Nothing wrong. But if we just start to rotate this key, which is something that we could do, we need to make sure that it's rotated in every place before we start using it. And that sounds very easy, but in reality, this is really tricky to do. And also, as soon as you have rotated it, you have to distribute it, and it's distributed, and someone can get hold of it. So it's compromised much already, I would say. So that's one of the issues we have. Another one is if that developer actually starts to leave the company, or is that consultants coming in, and he jumps out, and he has been using this key. Where's that key when he walks out of the building? It's still on his laptop, probably. Which means that we have a key wandering off. And if he's a nice guy, he will just delete it and everything is fine. But who knows what's going to happen? It's something that we don't have control over anymore. And since we have a lot of other services using the same key, it's really hard to do that rotation again. So we need to do that rotation. I think that's mainly the two most important parts with static keys that we need to keep in mind, or any keys at all that we share. So, is there many services who's using static keys out there? Yeah, it is. Service bus. We have storage accounts. We have Cosmos DB. Oh, talking about Cosmos. This is a prime example of static key problem as well. Anyone heard of the Jupyter incident? Someone nodding? Yeah, someone of you nodding? Rest of you haven't? Okay, so Microsoft introduced something called Jupyter Notebook, I think it was. Yeah, thank you. So they introduced that, and when you deploy that on your service, you were able to connect to your Cosmos DB. All good so far. The problem was that anyone who used this Jupyter could get hold of your keys, which means that anyone could actually get access to your Cosmos DB. Small bug. So the whole thing, I mean, you could protect yourself, obviously. You could have rotated your keys, or you could have do VNet or something similar. But still, it's really troublesome when something like that happens. And it was every Cosmos DB who's used that Jupyter. And it came out 1.5 years ago. I think it was not this summer, but last summer it went out. And also push a little bit pressure on not using static keys, right? We don't want that. So, what to do? That's why we're here, right? So, I would say something that has happened along this way is OAuth. Hope you can read my handwriting. Sorry, I'm gonna go ahead and do like that. I like a whiteboard, but still bad at writing. So OAuth has been introduced for you, probably. You have been using it with your AD, you have been using it with your Gmail or your Twitter account or whatever you use. But it has, for a long time, it has been very personalized, or at least connected to personalized. But in Azure, we have had the possibility to use this for quite some time with something called Service Principal, which you might know. And also, so we have OAuth, so we have the user who can use it. We have something called Service Principal. And we also need to have something, or what has been introduced more lately, like the last 2 years-ish, something like that, is something called Managed Identity. So Managed Identity is something, so user, we know our user accounts, right? That's something we know. We got the Service Principal, which is a service account-ish, so to say. The problem with that one is that you still have your client ID, client secret that you need to store somewhere. So what are we storing? Keys, right? So we store keys again. But Managed Identity comes along, and then we can actually say that the service itself has its own identity. Much like I have an identity in AD, the service itself has an identity, right? So we're going to draw this up a little bit soon as well. We're going to visualize it. But the big part about this is it's not only that OAuth exists, it's the layer of role-based access that has been put up on Azure. Because that's actually what helps us. In the beginning, when we started with Azure, we have been in the early days, there was one admin role. That was the only thing that existed. But you have been doing it for quite some time and doing it today, you know that you can have different roles depending on your purpose, what you're doing. So for instance, you're very rarely an owner of a subscription. If you're not an admin of some sort, you often have like contributor rights and you have limited scopes. All of that comes from role-based access. And now we're talking a user level, but we also know one of the good things is those services that we're talking about, they are bringing this role-based access into their services as well. And that's the fun part. Now the fun part starts. Okay, I've been rambling around. You might be a bit confused. No one's confused? Are you just admitting it? Okay. I'm counting on not admitting it. So I'm just gonna go ahead. Let's just visualize it because it's much easier when we visualize things. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna add Azure AD here. And I'm gonna do I'm gonna go ahead and write myself. And this is the real world. Or not real world, but let's say it's the world, the rest of it at least. So this is me. I'm happy. I have a user account in AD, right? So this is Mattias. Let's put that in another color, I think, just to make it clear. So there we go. Let's do the blue. So I have a user. And when we introduced that managed identity that we talked about, so let's for simplicity say that I developed a logic app. I'm going to write LA. That logic app is something physical that's running in our Azure environment today. When I used the managed identity, I will actually create this service. Let's use MSI to make it clear. So I will then create this. So now that one has, and I have a user. You all know that. You know yourself logging in of a user. We can do the same for our service. which will have an identity at the same thing. And the cool part is that we can also assign things the same way. So the way this is looking like is in reality, if we go in here, when I log into Azure Portal, this is what I see. And if I just go in and just click on Azure Active Directory that's actually managing things, we have users, right? So these are the users that actually have access to my environment. And we also have something called enterprise applications. And inside enterprise applications, we can actually find those managed identities. And the cool part about this is that when I log in, I use my credentials, I use my MFA, no one else knows about it. And when the identity service logs in, they use the same thing, they use their own thing. We cannot mimic this, we cannot take this place. And that's an important part. So let's just see how that looks like. So let's just go ahead and let's go into my resource group. So we have something called access control. As I said, role assignments. And here we can see who has different rights on my resource group. Oh yeah, of course. Better? Still a bit blurry. Better like that, maybe? Nice. So I can see who has privileges on this, and there's tons of privileges on this service. So I can see my user, and I can also see a bunch of other things. Service principals, and I can see, yeah, whatever it has. And this also comes along to our services. So I can then go in, and we can just take, did I lose track? Oh, there we go. So I can go in and on any service and see what the access is. But let's just start with creating something. So I have a logic app here, which will do a publish a message on a service bus, which is really simple. I've set this up with a normal way, normal key situation. So we're gonna move that away later. But this is the identity I'm talking about. So this is the identity part. So all services that has this identity, and we can then bring it to on. When I save this, yes, I will create that user in the AD. So now, let's keep that. I will then create that user that we saw earlier. So if I go into the AD, I will actually find this under my enterprise application, and I can go to Managed Identities. And I can search for int 00. There we go. Publish message. So this is actually my identity of that service. And I have no idea what client ID, client secret, and stuff like that is, because that's hidden for me. It's all hidden. It's containing that by itself. Cool. So now we've been able to do something like that. And when we bring in services, we will be using Service Bus in this case. So we will bring Service Bus. For you who have been working with Service Bus, you might be familiar that there are queues and topics and stuff like that on it. I will not do anything hard on this. I will just talk about authorization. So there will be not a lot of code or any good data. It will just be the authorization. So inside of this, I have a queue. Let's just draw it like this because it's a queue. My queue. Very, very bad name. But anyway, in order to access this, originally we would use this access key that they have because they built in that service. So in that service, they have something called, let's just draw that access key. Access key. I can use that to connect to it. But I want to get away from that. Yeah. Hang on. Yep. Exactly. So the one we're talking about now is shared access policies. Yes, exactly. Sorry, bad naming on me. So it's a shared access policy that I can create. It's more or less It's better than most services have, but it's still a key. In the end, it's a primary key that we can use, we can share, and there's a connection string. So this is how I can connect to it right now. But that's not the way I want to do. So I want to use this key thing. Then we have something called roles, as I mentioned, the role. And then we have Service Bus has its own roles inside of Azure. So it's actually called something like, let's look at it so I don't spell it wrong again. I'm going to go ahead. On access control, I can actually go to my queue. So I have my queue down here. And then I can go to access control again. And I can go to role assignments. And I can see you actually have roles. I can see like there's Azure Bus Data Owner and a receiver. That sounds interesting. Receiver and publisher. And if I go to add, I will be able to see the 3 specific roles up here. That's actually only for Service Bus. So this is only for Service Bus. And these are very important to understand because they are, if we want to receive data over a queue, we can actually do this on only this queue. We can do sender on only this queue, and we can do whatever. And some services like logic apps and functions requires actually have this receiver on the queue level. You cannot do it on the whole namespace, you have to do it on the queue level. Otherwise it won't work. So I can then do that. So in my AD, I can then go ahead and assign role. So let's just say that we have a logic app that will publish messages. So I can do a service bus publisher. Was it publisher? Was it sender, right? Maybe. Let's do it right. Oh. What's this? Interesting. Sender. Good. Then I will write. So I can assign this sender role to my identity. So this logic app we had, I can do that. And thanks to that, when my logic app out here will actually connect here. Whoa. What did I do? What did I do? Okay. So go ahead. Okay, it's going to draw for me. Nice. So when my logic app is going to go there, we're not going to use the access key. We're going to use this service principal. And we'll manage identity, and we're going to use that role. So let's just take a look at that. Going to go out. So let's just go ahead and push sender. Go next. I can then do it to a user. So me as a user. Service principal is that other one we had, which is the more old one. But I can also go manage identity. Then when I select this, I can actually go ahead and select my logic app. And I can go ahead and search for int00. There we go, publish message. Sounds good. So now I can actually use that identity in order to send messages. And I assign the role. So let's just check that out. Let's go back here. And let's just go to my publish message. And let's just go ahead and see that. I did this yesterday, so I send a message out on the bus. Very simple one. And there we go. Let's do a new one. So I can send now with my setting on. Oh, I will change it first, by the way. Sorry. Wrong button. There we go. I have my key set up. So we'll change the connection. So this is the connection string 1, which was working yesterday. So I hope it worked now. Let's use connection RBAC. Let's just go ahead and use my logic apps manage identity. And then I need to provide the service bus namespace. And then I usually also always pick like this one. So I need to have this SB, test B. Yep. So I need to go back to my service bus. I need to copy that link, and it's this, but let's go to overview of there we go. Let's go to this overview. And it's the host name and it's SB in front. So let's go back, as I said, SB. SB. There we go. And let's add that. So that's the namespace endpoint. So So now I've changed to actually use my managed identity. Let's press it save. And let's run the trigger. And let's just add a message. And let's have hello Svetog. And let's run. That seems to be working good. Let's go back and see. Let's refresh. And see, we have a message sent on this bus. So now I've actually connected to it and I've sent a message with my new created role instead. So I'm using this path now, using the service bus role and MSI, which means that I don't have any idea of what this user has for client ID, client secret, anything. I'm just aligning that to Azure, which is nice for me. Cool, let's just so that's fun. Let's just go ahead and take this picture from another perspective. Now I've been using this as a service, right? So, and obviously, I want to be able to connect to this as a developer as well, right? Because sometimes I need to debug things. I need to work with things. And I need to use this as my user. The cool part is that I can still use my user and do the same thing, same way. So let's just go ahead and look into how a receiver would look like for this. And in this case, I have created a receiver. It still has the same, it's very simple. This is just auto-generated. I will zoom in, by the way, because I remember. Let's do it like that. It's super simple, right? It's not much code at all. And if I go to my settings files, you will see that my service bus connection right now is a shared access policy, which is boring. But let's just see. This is how we have been working all the way through. So let's just go ahead and fire it up and make sure that's actually working so you can see that we're using keys. So it's firing up and it actually gets my message. Hello Svetog. Sounds good. See if it's printing it as well. Oh, there we go. Hello Svetog. Perfect. But this is not so good. So, or I want to change. So let's go ahead and go to my settings again. I will just follow this link because it's easier. I can use my user, as I said before. I need to do some reading on this because it's some. I would say that they have hidden some of these settings quite well. They're going back up more and more, but they're still. So for there's an identity-based section here, which means that the setting has to be in a specific format. This is the trickiest part so far in this, is that my connection name prefix has to be followed by a bunch of underscores and fully qualified namespace. So if I go back to my settings file, I will then use the same name. Oh, let's go ahead and just do that. No. Let's just go ahead and do that, and let's use the same name and comment this out. Service bus connection, and we need to add that fully qualified namespace. There we go. So we need to have the namespace. And let's just go back. We can see example of it. It's the same that we used without the sb : //. So I can just go copy this one. It's this part. Oh, copy, please. And there we go. Let's just try this out and see how it goes. Seems to be working fine. Let's go and send some message. Run the trigger with payload, and let's just use that one and text message. Hello, we're back. And let's send. And I got the message to me. Now via magic, right? Because I missed something, I realized. How do I even get this to work right now? Anyone has an idea? I actually use my own user. So in tools and in options, if I scroll down, there's something called app service authentication. And in this section, I have a user. So I actually have this user plugged in, which makes it work. Otherwise it wouldn't. And this user is then connected, and I can actually use it the way I want it to. So now my user, let's go back to the whiteboard again. So now my user also has these privileges on this service bus, which means that both of us can send and receive on this service bus. And we're using our own identities. So what's happening when my laptop is walking away and someone is, when I leave the building, they're closing down my AD account, right? And what happens with my access? It's gone. I have no access anymore. Which means that in reality we did the same thing. We didn't change much. Obviously we needed to have, I didn't have resender, I did actually have something called owner as another, I think it's called data owner, which I was using as my role. But as soon as I assigned that one, I could start using this namespace and I could actually start working on it. And I kind of increased my security level by far, since that key is no more there and it's not used anymore. But we still have a problem, right? In this setup. Anyone can figure out what it is? We still allow keys. Because you saw me doing my debugging with the key, right? I actually used the connection string to connect. So that's the next thing in these scenarios, is that we can go back to our, in this case, rollback airbag sample service bus namespace, and you can see local authentication here. It's enabled. So I can go in and click, and I can say disabled and save. And now, if I would use a connection string, it will not work. Now you have to use AD to connect. So this is how you enforce this. Not only getting people to use static keys, but it's also like enforcing how do we actually make the developers do that. Because I know one thing from being a developer, and that is that we are lazy. Yeah, it works. Why not use it? Yeah, it's just me. No one will notice. It's just me. Yep. Exactly. Yep. It is. So everyone has their own mechanism. So the question is like, when we do deploy this, because now I've been using the service up front, and I've been using logic apps, and I've been just hammering things in. But deployment is another story. So I will elaborate a little bit on this as well, because I will take what you asked. So if you go for functions, for instance, for doing this, we need to have this. I have a prepared one just for showing off the settings. So if we're gonna use this, we need to have the configuration in our app settings the same way as I did in my local settings. And I need to have that identity on for this resource, obviously. And I also need to assign that role. And we come to that, but that's probably the first hardest hit you get when you start using this, when you need to assign that role. So in this case, if you look at this function app, which has the same thing. Oh, not. Let's go. There we go. This is the fully qualified namespace for service bus connection. So you just do the same thing. So it's still the connection name and then an underscore fully qualified namespace, and you add the namespace. But what I also have done up here, which is something, is that I also connect to my storage account with MSI as well. So I can change that. But it's every time you do that, these settings kind of change. So in this case, it's underscore account name. In this case, it's __ fully qualified namespace. And this is also, I also have a key vault settings in this, just to make even easier to get out. Yes, a question. That is one thing, but it's still like if you need to, that key is still problematic to get out, and I understand it's cumbersome because it's a long story that I'm trying to tell. When you get used to this, it's really much simpler because in reality, what you deploy is this. You don't even need to care about anything else. Yeah, because I would recommend doing ARM template or bicep or something that you actually script this. Yeah, I understand that. I understand that. But still, we want to move away from that key thing. And I know that we are using services. I do the same using ARM, like bringing out keys and storing them all over the place. But it's still like every time we need to do a change, it's really cumbersome to get that to move. So now I've done this. We have locked this down, this service bus namespace down. As we said, the next thing that's going to be actually problematic, it's when we start deploying this, because we want to deploy this. And it's actually quite simple to deploy, because we don't need to do advanced ARM or bicep queries to get keys out of our service bus namespace, for instance, in this case. But then, since I said earlier, we usually get like low amount of roles, because least privileges is quite common to use. I would recommend it to use it, obviously, because it's really important. But assigning roles, that is actually not that easy to have. You usually don't have that, because it's more or less owner and something called user access administrator that we can use for that. And often you don't have that user access administrator role. You usually have contributor on your resource group, and then you can deploy whatever you want. And since before, when we used service bus and access, or their shared access policies, then we could manage that with contributor role. That was perfectly fine. But adding role assignments is not. So then we need to add a role to our deployment that is called user. Let's just pick it from this one instead, because I'll probably do it wrong anyway. Let's just search it. It's easier. User. Isn't it user access maybe? I think I have that. Okay, I didn't have that. Let's go there. User access administrator. You need to have that role when you deploy things. You can actually set these roles. Because when you do that, if I'm gonna show you an ARM template just for fun. I'm not sure if you like it or not, but this is how you actually can do an ARM template on this. And it's like, this has Cosmos data reader. Oh, did I use Cosmos? Okay, this was special for Cosmos. I took the wrong one. But it's not much more data to add. More or less, it's just that you need to have these small templates with you all the time, and you need the access rights. That's what you need. And you can even use, I didn't talk so much about it, but it's two different of these managed entities. One called system assign, which we saw me doing, and there's also something called user assign. User assign, you can be created by itself. So if we go here and we go user assign, if we go to managed entity, I can actually create a user assigned managed entity. A user assigned managed entity, the difference is that I can create it on forehand. I can assign multiple services to the same, actually, which means that we'll grant the same access for these services. And it will also be possible to do something in advance. So if you're not able to get that user access administrator role on your deployment account, someone else needs to have it, you can prep it by admitting them to actually do this for you and create. So I think that's mostly about what I actually have to tell. So let's see what I forgot in the PowerPoint I actually created. So key takeaways. I would say start using this, even if it feels troublesome. It's very, very easy when you get into it, because you don't need to do the complexity is actually lower over time, and it's easier to manage. The only thing that's gonna be troublesome is that first time you do it. You need to think a new way, and you need to have that role in order to be able to do it if you're not owner already, which you shouldn't be. And also, this is internal stuff. So these managed identities is only used for your own AD. It cannot connect to another AD, so you can only use this in your own AD. Good to know. And yeah, use least privileges and access based on the resource itself, rather than just applying to everything just for fun. And yeah, let's get away from that leaking keys. Questions? Yes. So the question is, if I have a managed entity, in example in API management, who are connecting to a Cosmos DB, can I then have both read and write on the same identity? And yes, there is. So there is. Yeah, it will. So beforehand, when you needed to create with the key, you needed to do some complex things in your API management in order to connect. Now you can just do that with your managed entity, and that's a simple one-liner nowadays. And you can then send it back. The only thing you need to be sure of is that to assign those roles to that managed entity, and that will just work. So it will be a very much simpler solution for you. Any more questions? Cool. Then I think we are about time. And thank you very much for listening to me. And just reach out if you find me on. I have questions afterwards as well.